Hello. This will conclude the lectures on Hamlet. This will be uh, much briefer than the previous lectures. With most Shakespeare plays, a great deal happens in the first three acts, and the final two acts are kind of bringing together an action. Um, some key points, though, there's a turning point in Act 4 with Hamlet that we'll have to pay close attention to. It contains one of Hamlet's most famous soliloquies. And there is um, some reflection on human nature and on death in these scenes as well. So um, I'm just going to jump right into Act 4 then uh, and set up the situation that winds up in Act 5, Scene 2, with many people dead on the stage, almost everybody dead on the stage, everybody of any significance. So, if you recall, the the last thing I talked about was the bedroom scene with Gertrude, Queen Gertrude, and Hamlet, in which Hamlet um, kills Polonius, Ophelia's father, um, and very very jestingly drags him out. He'll continue this kind of jesting, riddling um, response to Polonius's death, his own murder of Polonius, as though it really is irrelevant in many ways. So um, the Claudius and Gertrude discuss um, Polonius's murder and the attempt to cover it up. They claim that he had killed Polonius in a fit of temporary insanity. Again, the play on this idea of madness and sanity is very interesting. Here they pretend that he is mad for the sake of exonerating him, and the resolve is to send him to England. Um, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are brought in to cover up the murder um, and to smooth everything over. This leads into Act 4, Scene 2, where Hamlet confronts Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and basically reveals that he's aware that they are spying on him for the king, makes them his enemy. Right? They're enemies of his because of their duplicity. Um, so this leads into a fairly important scene, Act 4, Scene 3. And Hamlet's approach to Polonius's death, he continues to kind of treat it with a kind of detachment. The answer as to where Polonius's body lies, Hamlet gives a riddle which presents a very bleak, punning account of human life. He says, we fat all creatures else to fat us, and we fat ourselves for maggots. So we fat all creatures to fat us means we feed other creatures so we can eat them. We feed them, they grow, we eat them when they're mature, but we fat ourselves, we feed ourselves, we grow so that eventually when we're dead, the maggots will eat us. If you look at human life in this deeply materialistic way, it's a cycle of just consumption. Your fat king and your lean beggar, he says, is but variable service. two dishes but to one table, right? So both kings and the lowest beggars, they are both they're both to one end, towards one table, um, for maggots. That's the end. So there's not much to say about human life, then, right? There's there's that, right? That's it. Um, so Hamlet takes his leave from Claudius and Gertrude. There's an interesting little play on words. Again, all of Hamlet's jestings, um, all of Hamlet's wordplay shows his wit, his cleverness, and his ability to escape them by using language like this. So he says, "Farewell, dear mother." This is at 48 to 50 in Act 4, Scene 3. "Farewell, dear mother, my mother. Father and mother is man and wife." Man and wife meaning husband and wife, right? Man, one flesh. Husband and wife become one flesh in Christian matrimony. So, my mother. Um, the irony of that, right? Is he accepting their marriage, or is he just saying my mother and not accepting it? It's clever, it's witty. Um, he says goodbye to his mother, but not his father. The implication is I'm saying goodbye to you, but is he acknowledging him as his rightful father? Probably not. So again, the brilliance of Hamlet here in playing with words. So he is. It's pretty clear in lines 56 to 66 in Act 4, Scene 3, that Claudius's stratagem here is to send Hamlet to his death. There are papers that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are holding that accuse Hamlet of treason and are asking the English, who will find the papers, to execute Hamlet upon his arrival in England. Notice the cowardly nature of Claudius to do this. Is the queen complicit in this? Unclear. Probably not. I think Gertrude probably thinks that he's being sent away so that the murder can be covered up and he can come back later on. So the rest of this play devolves upon Hamlet as he's leaving, encountering the army of Fortinbras. Remember, Fortinbras was defeated by Hamlet's father, and the worry was that he was going to attack Denmark and right the wrong. But instead, it turns out he's passing through the army. Fortinbras's army is passing through Denmark on his way to Poland, to annex a plot of land that's basically meaningless. Now, Hamlet finds this noble, right? That such an enterprise of risking armies for something insignificant shows the ability to act, which he does not have. So he reflects on this inability to avenge his father's death. And this is the famous Fortinbras soliloquy, which I will take a look at and read and comment on as I go through. He tells Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and the others to move away. "I'll be with you straight. Go a little before," he says. And then imagine Hamlet on the stage by himself. "How all occasions do inform against me." The sense of every external situation going against him. "And spur my dull revenge." So the spurring of his dull revenge, they go against him, they spur him, but his revenge is still dull. "What is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed?" So notice that we feed maggots, we live to feed maggots is being questioned here. What's the point if this is all we do? A beast no more. True. Sure, he hath made us with such large discourse. That's a reference to the fact that that God has given human beings the gift of speech, discourse, which speech being a capacity of reason or intellect. So he goes right for the philosophical, right? Sure, he that made us with such large discourse, looking before and after, gave us not that capability and godlike reason to fuss in us unused. Right? We weren't given this capacity for reason, godlike reason, to just not to leave it unused. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event. So is he whether some base instinct is holding him back, or he's thinking too much, thinking too precisely on the event, a thought which quartered hath but one part wisdom and ever three parts coward. All right, so a thought that's broken apart. There's the whole idea, by the way, of drawing and quartering. Right, the four arms and legs cut off. Right, when you quarter a thought, cut off the arms and legs, you've got one part wisdom, three parts coward. So the wisdom is defeated by the cowardice. When you cut things apart, you dice up thought. I do not know why yet I live to say this things to do, sith I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. So notice the philosophical comes before and it's applied. He doesn't know why he's not done the act. He has godlike reason. It's to be used. He has the ability. He doesn't know why he's not doing it. Is it some base cowardly instinct, or is he thinking too much? Examples gross as earth exhort me. Witness this army of such mass and charge. So he sees this army and he's exhorted to act, led by a delicate and tender prince whose spirit with divine ambition puffed makes mouths at the invisible event, exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death and danger dare even for an eggshell. So he's daring all of this power for nothing, an eggshell. Rightly to be great is not to stir without argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor's at the stake. So the idea here is that one should act. One shouldn't quibble about one's activity. How stand I then that I have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let all asleep? And he's got all these actions taken place with his father killed, his mother sullied, stained. His blood is boiling, and he's not acting. While to my shame I see the imminent death of 20,000 men that for a fantasy and trick of fame go to their graves like beds, fight for a plot whereon the numbers cannot try the cause, which is not tomb enough and continent to hide the slain. So the comparison with the army here going to death, risking death. Oh, from this time forth my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth. So Hamlet here is spurred on by this action, and we see that that his resolve now will be to act and avenge his father. A very famous soliloquy with interesting philosophical reflection about the nature of reason, God-given reason, its gift, not just for thinking, but for but for action. This really does reveal the kind of humanistic center of Shakespeare's depiction here. If this is being presented positively, right? The whole point of the Renaissance and humanistic putting humans in the center was that you use reason not simply to contemplate but to act, but to build things and create things. This is the unleashing of creativity in Renaissance power and Renaissance culture. Hamlet is articulating this, and is Shakespeare presenting a kind of condemnation of the previous way of thinking about things, where reflection was just a form of contemplation without action. Interesting. So the whole issue of the Renaissance culture and ideals of action are being dramatized and put in play here. Okay. So back to the castle. We find Horatio and the Queen. Remember, Horatio is Hamlet's best friend, very loyal. The topic of conversation is Ophelia's madness, and the account of her behavior. And here's the point about speech, discourse, what Hamlet just called discourse. Her speech almost makes sense, but then goes off. Nothing sure, yet much unhappily. So there's no method in her madness. The suggestion is she's mad. She starts making sense. She gets to the point of trauma, really, which is her father's death and Hamlet's murder of Polonius and Hamlet's rejection of her, and that trauma unhinges her, right? The trauma itself, so the memory of that leads her into distraction. It's contrasted with Hamlet, whose madness had a method to it. The Queen Gertrude has some very ironic words at 19 and 20 in Act 4, Scene 5. So full of artless jealousy is guilt. It spills itself in fearing to be spilt. So full of artless jealousy. So the jealousy of guilt is artless, right? Guilt is something that can't be hidden, it suggests. It's artless. It's without guile. It's hidden in the conscience and can't be removed. So it spills itself in fearing to be spilt. Guilt doesn't want to be revealed, so it hides itself, but in hiding itself, it reveals itself. That's the paradox. Is she talking about herself? Is she talking about Hamlet? That's an interesting question. Is she talking about Claudius? So those two lines are extremely important. The king continues this idea of doubling as a form of madness, duplicity. Poor Ophelia, divided from herself and her fair judgment, without which we are pictures or mere beasts, right? And that picks up on that idea, right, that Hamlet has raised. When reason is overthrown, it becomes duplicitous and doubled, and divided against itself, and turns us either into beasts or into mere pictures, mere images of ourselves. Okay, so this again, the action becomes very quick here, as the final scene. We head to the final scene, the final denouement. Laertes' entrance comes back from Paris, bringing with it reports of rebellion. And Laertes refuses loyalty to the king and to God. This was an allegiance that Polonius accepted, his father accepted, but he wants revenge. He's here. Laertes is linking Hamlet with Claudius, right? And Claudius denies responsibility for Polonius's death. Ophelia enters again. She just seems to be wandering around. She's got flowers, herbs. This terrible response of Laertes at 153. Let her come in. How now? What noise is that? Oh, heat! Dry up my brains, tears 7 times salt, burn out the sense and virtue of mine eye. There's that image of actually having one's eyes torn out. Certainly an allusion to Oedipus. By heaven, thy madness shall be paid with weight till our scale turn the beam. O rose of maid, dear maid, kind sister, sweet Ophelia. O heavens, is it possible a young maid's wits should be as mortal as a poor man's life? So the connection there between her father's death and her losing her mind is pretty clear, caused by Hamlet. And then she just the things she says are confusing. I'm not going to read them, but she is singing. She's giving out flowers. The song is a kind of lament, but when she gets to the really painful part, she breaks off and moves in another direction. And Laertes recognizes this. Thoughts and afflictions, passion, hell itself, she turns to favor and to prettiness. Right, so that it's too much to bear, so she passes it over by this tripping song, and this is a form of madness, right? A total form of madness. The sense of the sense of grief here of sorrow that can't be borne is overwhelming, and that really is the center of this. The sorrow here, the trauma of loss on the part of Ophelia that Laertes is deeply affected by, and now it's his double desire for revenge against Hamlet, and this creates in Act 4, Scene 7, the conversation between Laertes and the King Claudius, in which they conspire to kill Hamlet, with Laertes as the agent. The word used is the organ at 68. He will be the organ of Hamlet's death. Right after this, the Queen brings news of Ophelia's drowning at 161. Oh, woe doth tread upon another's heel, so fast they follow. Your sister's drowned, Laertes. Drowned? Oh, where? There is a willow grows askant the brook that shows hoary leaves in the glassy stream. This is poetry, pure poetry. There with fantastic garlands did she make of cornflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples. So she made a crown out of the flowers. That liberal shepherds give a grosser name, but our cold maids do dead men's fingers call them. There on the pendant boughs her crown it weeds, clamoring to hang, an envious silver broke, when down her weedy trophies and herself fell in the weeping brook. Her clothes spread wide, and mermaid-like a while they bore her up, which time she chanced snatches of old lauds, as one incapable of her own distress. or like a creature native and endued unto that element. But long it could not be till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death. So her madness causes her death. This image of Ophelia drowning has been the subject of poems, of paintings. Her death was romanticized in the 19th century in England, presented it as an image of romantic desire, and idealized and really put into a kind of a frame of beauty, which is what Gertrude does here. So Gertrude suggests that it was an accident. We'll see that the pronouncement by the priests here, by the religious authorities, is one of suicide, and suicides were not given a hallowed grave. They were put outside of blessed ground, because they were largely considered anathema and damned. So that Act 5, Scene 1, we've got basically the final scenes right here. One is Ophelia's funeral, and the next is the scene of the duel. Act 5, Scene 1, we find Hamlet returning to Denmark. The grave digger is talking to another man, and they're discussing Ophelia's Christian burial. It's fairly comic. The scene is comic, but the seriousness of the work is put on display here, and Hamlet warms to it. Of course, he likes witty humor, and he jumps in, and he begins to, his witticism takes over from 82 to 110. It's filled with equivocations and puns that are completely inappropriate for Ophelia's burial. Hamlet does not know that it's Ophelia being buried. When he realizes, by the way, they're digging, and when they're digging graves, they uncover all kinds of other bones and skulls. He realizes that the skull that he's looking at belonged to Yorick, an old acquaintance of his, and he begins to reflect on the nature of death at 178 to 205. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, and now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar? Not one now to mock your own grinning, quite chapfallen. Now get you to my lady's table and tell her, let her paint an inch. To this favor she must come, make her laugh at thee. Prithee, Horatio, tell me one thing. Right, so the sense of the seriousness of death now he faces in the skull of his old friend. So here we have the funeral procession, and Hamlet is shocked to discover that it's Ophelia, his beloved, and again she's buried on ground unsanctified. 2:18. It's been determined by the priest that she committed suicide, so she's outside the grounds of Christian burial. The Queen's words are quite affecting here and beautiful and very sweets. She's holding flowers, right? And again, the flower, the symbol of fair Ophelia, and she's dropping them into the grave. Sweets to the sweet. Farewell. I hope thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife. I thought thy bride bed to have decked, sweet maid, and not have strewn thy grave. She is in some ways a kind of Antigone-like figure here, although without Antigone's edge and sharpness. But with a difference, of course, largely driven to death by madness and death by her beloved, by Hamlet. Hamlet emerges as he sees Laertes jumping into the grave, right? And he admires Laertes' true grief for his sister. And Hamlet says, I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my own sum. This is at 258 to 260. So he loved her 40,000 times more than Laertes. The king and queen call Hamlet's words madness. He's mad. They don't believe it. They think he's crazed. So poor Hamlet, his inaction and his false action of killing Polonius by mistake has led to disaster. And this is summed up in Act 5, Scene 2, which is the end of the play. Hamlet and Horatio, we find. Hamlet tells Horatio of how he had Rosencrantz and Guildenstern killed in England. He replaced the papers that were to have him executed with papers to execute them instead. He doesn't care whether they were aware of the charge or not. He had them killed simply because they were complicit with the king. Horatio, so Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, go to it. That basically is a way of saying they're gone to their deaths. So there's a Laertes now challenges Hamlet to a duel, to avenge his father Polonius's death. He sends to know if your pleasure hold to play with Laertes. Horatio says at 170. I'm sorry. The messenger says at 178. To play with Laertes, the duel is a sport. The question is this to the death? Hamlet's response: I am constant to my purposes. They follow the king's pleasure. I am constant to my purposes. So he's going to stay. Yes, I'm going to do it. The sense here is that his purpose has been all along, but he's been inconstant. He's been constant to the purpose because he's been unable to avenge his father's death. And then they follow the king's pleasure is a kind of joke, right? They follow what the king wants, King Claudius. So you've got this weird linking of I'm going to do this. It fits with my previous desires. It fits with my wanting to avenge the king's death. Here, Hamlet links God's will with necessity at line 197. Again, Hamlet, always the philosopher. We defy augury. We defy omens, right? He's not looking to ill omens to determine what's going to happen, which is something that the Greeks would have done. There is special providence in the fall of a sparrow. That's a reference to Christ's Jesus' words in the gospel, not a sparrow falls from heaven that my Father doesn't know about it. If it be, 'tis not to come. If it be, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. So this is a paradoxical way of thinking about the relationship between God's providence and necessity. It's going to happen. All we need to do is be ready for it. The readiness is all. This is human nature's way of moving within that necessity. The readiness is all, since no man of aught he leaves knows what is it to leave betimes. Let be. So the paradoxical way of linking free will with necessity here is an interesting one. Is Hamlet advocating a kind of divine determinism? Is he leaving open free will as an agency in human nature? Very unclear. It seems paradoxical at best. So the duel begins. This is the final scene at 2:02. Neither Hamlet nor Laertes, as they duel, mention Polonius or Ophelia. There's a civility there. You should watch this scene as it unfolds, right? In either of the plays. When does the seriousness that underlies the acting break out? His final, will this brother's wager frankly play, is ironic, right? Again, frankly play. Will play become serious? Remember the play within the play. This is another version of that. When will this play acting at a duel become real, and we get on to the real thing? So the way this unfolds, right, is that there's a goblet that has been poisoned. Laertes' sword has been poisoned, right? And so the play acting here, right, is serious in the sense that the king has set this up so that if Laertes does in fact wound Hamlet, it won't be to the death from the wound, but from the poison. So the way this unfolds, of course, is that Gertrude wants a drink. She drinks the goblet that has poison in it. And the question is, does she know? It's not clear from the way Shakespeare presents her. Take a look at her face in the films. Does she know, or does she do it by mistake? And this, of course, leads to all the other deaths, right? Hamlet is wounded by the sword. He takes Laertes' sword, wounds him, kills Claudius. Everybody winds up, everybody there importantly winds up dead. Hamlet claims that that now he can't explain his actions. Death won't allow it. Had I but time, he says. This is at 3:20 to 3:24. As this fell sergeant, Death is strict in his arrest. He's always joking, right? Oh, I could tell you, but let it be. Again, there's that let it be. Horatio, I am dead. Thou livest, report me and cause a right to the unsatisfied. So he's already given um, um, Horatio instructions. Horatio seeks to drink the poison because he can't handle the suffering, all the suffering here. And Hamlet tells him um, to stop. Here is yet some liquor left. Hamlet says, as thou art a man, give me the cup, let go. By heaven, I'll have it. O God, Horatio, what a wounded name, things standing thus unknown, shall I leave behind me. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. You've got an Odyssey-like account of storytelling. He's telling Horatio to live so that he can tell the sad story of Hamlet and the tragical history of Hamlet and his ultimate death. So again, the fact that tragedies are stories so that we can learn something, perhaps. And Horatio is told to have courage to live. Hamlet names Fortinbras his successor, so Fortinbras becomes the king after in wildly ironic turnaround. Horatio's words are tremendous. Now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince. Sorry for that brief interruption. So Horatio, now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. Why does the drum come hither? So Fortinbras arrives, and Horatio presents a kind of catalog of crimes. They're too vague to be specific, and they're unclear. But Horatio's last lines, I think, and Fortinbras's last lines are interesting. Horatio, of that I shall. He's asking about what's going on. Of that I shall also. Sorry. Of that I shall have also cause to speak, and from his mouth whose voice will draw no more. But let this same be presently performed, even while men's minds are wild, lest more mischance on plots and errors happen. Horatio is concerned for that civil war will break out. Let 4 captains bear Hamlet like a soldier to the stage, for he was likely, had he been put on, to have proved most royal. This is, again, Fortinbras, his purported enemy. And for this passage, the soldier's music and the right of war speak loudly for him. Take up the bodies. Such a sight as this becomes the field, but here shows much amiss. Go, bid the soldiers shoot. So all these bodies laying dead on the ground look like war, a war zone. They don't belong here in the court. So again, a commentary on the way in which duplicity and vengeance destroy from within. So we have Tolkien's idea again of the that he mentioned in his commentary on Beowulf, how Beowulf's representation of internal strife and political feuding gets carried on into both the political reality of England later on, and it becomes represented in plays. So a link to Beowulf and political machinations, and I'm going to end with just a brief bit of advice for the paper. I think as you're watching a film, whichever film you choose, the Laurence Olivier or the Gibson Hamlet. Keep the text in front of you. Take notes. Make sure you have enough evidence and think about the ways in which things change. Think about the ways in which differences in the film adaptation interpret words differently or actions differently, or things being left out, what that means. These are all ways of approaching this particular assignment.